Hey everyone, Tin Man here, and today we have the other side on Mythic plus 15. The affixes this week are Tyrannical, Raging, Explosive, and of course the seasonal affix Prideful. So on this first pull, I have to wait for the tank to grab aggro and everything before popping Time Warp and Combustion. And I probably use Combustion a little bit too early here, since I immediately, after I use it, I get targeted by this Ravager effect and have to move away from my Rune of Power. And so that's going to cost me a lot of damage, and on future runs of this dungeon, I definitely will wait until that first Ravager goes out before I start my Combustion. Now, on fortified weeks, when the non-boss enemies have more HP, the usual strategy here is to Time Warp or Bloodlust on this first pull, and then it will be back up in time for the first boss. But on this 15 Tyrannical, this group actually has enough damage that we're going to get to the first boss before Bloodlust is back up and available. And maybe on slightly higher keys, like 16 or 17, this wouldn't be a problem as the mobs would have more HP, depending on the group's damage, of course. But in hindsight here, I think using Time Warp on this first pull was a mistake in our strategy. So moving on to the next platform, this pack is not that bad, which is nice because no one has any cooldowns available after that first pull. And I want to talk a little bit about the explosive affix here, since it's really the only affix this week that DPS players care about. Fire Mages can deal with explosive pretty well. A single Scorch is a quick cast ability that will take care of it. And you can see on this pack I'm targeting and scorching them quite a bit since I don't have DPS cooldowns up anyway. The other option for Fire Mages is to Fire Blast it, which is obviously quicker, doesn't potentially waste a cast if one of the other DPS players kills the orb before you do, but it does come with a pretty big downside in the fact that there are a lot of times when it is going to be suboptimal to use a Fire Blast, but that explosive orb just really does need to die. And I think it happens quite a bit during this run. I suboptimally Fire Blast an explosive orb, which will cost me a good chunk of DPS, as opposed to just holding the Fire Blast for a more optimal time, and hoping that our melee DPS or our Boomkin can handle that explosive orb instead of me. We'll keep an eye on that as we move forward, though, into this next Raging Spirit. I do have my Combustion back up, and I always try to use it right on cooldown if at all possible, so I pop it once we pull the Raging Spirit here. I do have to cut out the Combustion a little bit short, though, since I have to activate the Urn, which has a cast time. It does stun him for a while and prevents his massive AoE cast. Now, this AoE cast is not that dangerous on Tyrannical weeks when the bosses are empowered as opposed to the trash, but on fortified weeks, the AoE will put a lot of strain on your healers, and it potentially would even cause a wipe. So it's just a good habit to make sure you're popping this Urn a few seconds into the fight to interrupt him or prevent that cast, even if it means losing some DPS from my Combustion. Next, we pull this small Raptor pack in order to get a good timing on Prideful, which will spawn right after most of these guys are down. And this is kind of the standard route in order to optimize the Prideful timings, getting one Prideful here and then another one right before the first boss, Hakar. But I really can't help but think that there might be another further way to optimize this route, since this pack is not really challenging at all and probably could be pulled with something else. And additionally, after this Prideful is done, we're just going to pull the two Risen Guards in the back towards Hakar, which I kind of think is a little bit of waste of the Prideful buff in my opinion. We're spending a lot of the Prideful buff just running back towards the next pack instead of actually being in combat with it. So especially on Tyrannical weeks, I think there might be a better way, but I'm not entirely sure. In any case, I do use my Combustion during Prideful, and like I said, we just try to keep Combustion on cooldown as much as possible, and I even get a little bit of Combustion damage onto the guards before I have to move away for their Ravager effect. And like I said, we're going to kite them back up the stairs, as once we kill them off, we have to get on our mounts and run back towards Hakar. So a little bit of backtracking, but this is what you have to do in order to get Prideful right before that first boss. Skipping ahead here a bit, we are in Hakar's wing, and the Prideful buff has just fallen off as we pull this pack, plus the patrolling mob coming up here on the left side. My Combustion is just coming up in a second, and I'll use it once it's up, and focus on using Flame Strike as opposed to Pyroblast, at least initially in the Combustion, as that's going to optimize damage at 3 or more targets when using a Flame Patch talent, which I am. Once the Combust is over, though, I'm going to be trying to focus on dealing with the Explosive Orbs as much as possible, and using my other utility like Interrupts, since Fire Mages have so very little damage outside of Combustion that I think it's just a better use of my time to Scorch an Explosive Orb as opposed to using Flame Strike or Fireball, even if technically those will deal more overall damage. The group utility is just much more important regardless, because once again, Fire Mages don't deal very much damage at all outside of Combustion. For these next two Blade Storming mobs, I do keep using Flame Strike on top of them to drop the Flame Patch, which is normally ideal at 2 targets, but it probably isn't that great in this particular situation, as the tank does have to kite him away from the Blade Storms, and thus they're going to move out of the Flame Patch, and it probably would have just been better to use single target damage on these guys when they're the only 2 left in the pack. It is good to note, though, that things like my Dragon's Breath or stun effects can interrupt their Bladestorm and potentially keep them in the AoE damage spells, and it also keeps some of the pressure off your tanks and melee DPS to avoid getting killed by their dangerous Bladestorm. Going into the next group, this pack is very easy as long as you can properly disrupt the casts of little guys to prevent them from transforming. I use my combustion as soon as possible, and luckily our group has so much CC that they never really get close to finishing their casts. The only way that I have to disrupt them is my Dragon's Breath, which is why you see me inching up closer and closer here, just in case I need to be that close in order to disorient them in case our other DPS don't get the stuns and interrupts on them. Afterwards, we're going to go and hide behind these pillars on the right-hand side here to line of sight the last pack into the radius of the urn to stun them. And as I'm standing by the urn, my camera angle does get a little bit wonky, and I can't quite see whenever the mobs get in range, so I do need to adjust a little bit, but it works out just fine in the end. I don't have cooldowns up once again, so I'm just going to be focusing on dealing flame strikes, just hard casting that with flame patch, and handling the explosive orbs as much as possible, and prepping my cooldowns for the prideful that's coming up right afterwards. While I was able to disrupt the first set of Bladestorms from these adds with my Dragon's Breath, we're not able to interrupt the next set, which is coming up here in just a few seconds, and our DK will die to it, and our Paladin healer also drops really, really low due to the heavy AoE damage in melee. And that's definitely the danger of playing melee DPS, or even just a melee healer, like a Paladin. Effects like that Bladestorm can be very punishing, and you have to move out and sacrifice your damage or healing in order to avoid it. But luckily, you can just release and run back easily, as the respawn point is just outside the hallway right behind us, which makes it much better than wasting a battle res when the run back is so close. After that pack is down, we get a Manifestation of Pride, and I've made a habit of using Combustion on this manifestation whenever possible. Combustion's cooldown is just so low that it doesn't really make sense to sit on it for the duration of this fight with the Prideful buff. And especially on higher keys, the AoE damage from Prideful really does ramp up and taxes your healers quite a bit. Plus, other classes with 2 or 3 minute cooldowns really do want to hold those cooldowns for after the Manifestation of Pride, and so if no one uses their DPS cooldowns at all, it could take a very long time. Even though that means that my Combustion will not be up right on the boss right after this, that's going to be okay because our other DPS will have most of their damage available, and I should still get Combustion up right at the tail end of the Prideful buff duration. So just from my force of habit and kind of the strategy that we typically take in this dungeon, I do use Time Warp right on the pull of this boss, but I didn't realize that there are still about 2 minutes left on the sated debuff, so it doesn't actually do anything, and just puts Time Warp on cooldown for no reason, and that's kind of awkward because in this fight, it can definitely get a little bit sketchy on Tyrannical towards the end, and it would have been really nice if I could have Time Warped, whenever the debuff does fall off, and, in 2 minutes time. I don't have too much damage initially, but our DK does have Army of the Dead, and our Boomkin does have Convoke, so he's still dropping pretty quickly. And while Combustion is down, I'm going to be focusing more on dealing with the Serpent adds and any explosives that might pop up. I did probably use one too many Fire Blasts, though, as I only have 1 charge when Combustion does come up and available, so I do have to delay my Combustion for a few seconds to at least have 2 charges of Fire Blast when we start. Once I do combust, though, I can finally get some of my damage back up and make my overall damage look at least a little bit more respectable compared to our other DPS. That lack of Fire Blast charge, though, at the start of the combustion does hurt me quite a bit, as I had to drop stacks of Infernal Cascade. If the Prideful buff was not a thing, I definitely would have waited a little bit longer before combusting here to kind of recover from that mistake, to make sure that I had enough Fire Blast to keep up Infernal Cascade, but with Prideful buff running out in a few seconds, I didn't want to delay it too long to start and miss out on that buff for the start of combustion. So overall, definitely a mistake to not pull more Fire Blast charges, and it cost me quite a bit here. As Hakar does get closer into execute range, there are going to be a couple Serpents right next to him, and I think, well, I hit him with a couple of Pyroblasts, so I want to spread my Ignite with Phoenix Flames, I kind of thought, I'm not going to need these because Hakar's going to die in a few seconds anyway. I'm not sure that it's really worth it, though, because my combustion is coming back off cooldown soon, and on Tyrannical plus his Blood Shield, it does take a while to finish him off even in execute range. So I go into my second combustion with very few charges of anything left, and I'm just going to Scorching and using instants as they come up. And so this is kind of a scuffed combustion. It's really not great at all, and I miss out on a ton of damage this fight by not properly pooling my Fire Blasts and Phoenix Flame charges. Despite all of that, though, we were able to clean up the Hakar a little bit slower than we probably could have if I had optimized my damage a little bit better, and we're going to move on to the next wing, which we've already cleared out most of the trash too, so we're going to skip ahead to that. So on to the Mana Storms wing, and I try to get a little bit cheeky here with this first mob. I think, this is not a fortified week, and I've got Alter Time. I can just stand here and do my full DPS and combustion, and then just heal with Alter Time. After a few ticks of the Haywire, I realize exactly how much damage it does, even without Fortified, and I quickly alter time and blink behind the pillar before my healer yells at me, or use a big cooldown like Lay on Hands or something and panic because I was being greedy and trying to get that extra little bit of DPS off. After that, though, it's a pretty easy matter to clean these guys up, and without alter time, I'm not going to get greedy on the second cast of Haywire, and I do properly hide out of line of sight before we clean them up after that second Haywire cast. Going into the next pack after this this drill dies, I kind of make it a complete mess. This pack is not that difficult. From a range DPS, you're just going to stand at range and do your damage. You don't need to worry about like their spin up charge, but I just do something. I just play horribly. Like I see the explosive orbs and I think, okay, I want to kill those explosive orbs, but then I need to move in order to get in line of sight of them. Never mind the fact that we've got, you know, multiple melee DPS to handle them. And then whenever they spawn, I keep on trying to like fire blast them or scorch them, but I do it in like the wrong order. Like I fire blast for a heating up proc, and then I scorch, and then I use another fire blast, but it's after the scorch goes, so I don't get hot streak, and I just like have these I just waste a whole bunch of charges, and my DPS is abysmal. It's like lower than the healers for quite a little bit. And so I played this horribly, even though this pack normally is not hard as range DPS. I think it's just explosive really messed with me for some reason here. I just played it very horribly, and maybe that's just inexperience with explosive. I haven't run too many dungeons on explosive as Fire Mage. Actually, I think this is my first one in this week, so that's definitely something to work on, is proper explosive management. I think I alluded to it at the start of the video with Scorch versus Fire Blast is a bit of a struggle. And here I really got punished for it by just playing poorly. In any case, going into the next hallway, we get another one of these Haywires. I'm not taking that risk again, even though I do have alter time available. I get super safe and out of line of sight because I know that I almost messed it up just a few moments earlier. After the first Haywire, though, I can sit here and fully do my combust rotation. We did pull the bot that has the lubricate ability, and that did go off, and that causes some of your spells to miss. I think it's a 25% chance, and I think that did mess up my combustion ever so slightly, and that one of my spells that I assumed would be a crit did miss. And I normally am jumping during combustion to avoid accidentally hard casting, but I correctly stopped jumping right before that lubricate went off, because otherwise I'd be stunned for a second and a half due to that. So this went okay, but you do need to be worried about getting interrupts on these guys to prevent that lubricate, as well as the self-cleaning apparatus or self-cleaning protocol from going off from healing in. It's a little bit more difficult than it sounds, because as a mage, I don't have a very short cooldown interrupt, and so neither does our boomkin. Luckily, we've got the melee DPS to handle a lot of those interrupts. In this next room, there's like this little Frogger maze set up, and as an engineer, I could have shut off. I could shut off the slime stuff, but one of the other people got in first and hit the button. There's a little red button on the left as you enter this room to turn that off, and makes this room very trivial. But you do have to be an engineer for that. In fact, I specifically got engineering on this character just to be able to have a battle res and to be able to do things like that in this dungeon. Here we do have double of these lubricator guys, and there's a lot of ticks that you need to get like as many of these interrupts as possible, and of course our group does not quite have that many, so some of them do go off, but we handle it just fine. I do save my combust though, because I know in this next room these mobs actually can hit really hard, especially on fortified, not so much on tyrannical, but even so there's a lot of interrupts that obviously you can't get because these guys just spam cast their abilities. So even if you have high interrupts in your group, you're not going to get them all, and they hit very, very hard. So you want to be bursting them down as quickly as possible, which is why I was trying to make sure I had combustion going into this room. Luckily, Solar Beam from a Roomkin does handle them pretty well, plus things like Dragon's Breath also AoE damage, and since they're not fortified, they do go down quickly enough with our combustion. Prideful coming up here in this room is a little bit awkward, mainly just because of how far away we are from the next boss. So in order to properly use this Prideful buff, we're going to have to walk a very long way. And also, I don't have combustion up, which I said I normally like to have up for Prideful, but I did think that having it for those slimes was a little bit higher priority, just because that's when it was up, and I know those slimes really do hurt a whole lot, especially on fortified weeks. So I thought it was more important to use combustion there. I do have a little bit of damage with my Rune of Power and Shifting Power, but not quite as much as a full combustion. So this one is going to take quite a bit longer than normal. So that's why we've got the Death Knight Anti-Magic Zone, as well as being prepared to use defensives such as like health potions and whatnot if it did take a little bit longer. This little gauntlet area, trying to run through this and not get knocked off by the slime is it should be easy as mage, right? You should just be able to blink right through it, but I'm always skeptical because it's a little bit of a curved path, and sometimes you just like blink and you don't go fully through it, and you just get hit and knocked off by the sludge, and that wastes prideful, wastes a lot of time, and also is a death counter against you, so definitely don't want to do that. Anyway, as we get into the Mana Storms here, we pull right away. I don't use Time Warp right on the pull. Now, we didn't have like a set strategy for this. This is just a pug, and I didn't know for sure exactly when we wanted to Time Warp here. So I didn't use it on the pull, partially because I was afraid we would just accidentally kill Millhouse right before we get into the second phase, because if you drop him down to 10% too quickly, then he's not there for the second phase in order to disrupt Maleficent, the other boss. And I don't know how valid of a concern that is, especially on tyrannical weeks. So I was going to save it to the Maleficent phase. On this this laser thing, you're supposed to like line up the laser and then to hit Millhouse and then run away from the laser before it goes off. But I ran too far and still got clipped by like the other end of it and almost died there. There wasn't any more damage going out, so I didn't need to like ice block or anything. But I definitely made a big mistake there, and I'd use my health potion just to make sure I was nice and safe. Going into phase 2, the Maleficent phase here, this is where we're going to use Time Warp just because I wanted to split up the damage. So we had Prideful for Millhouse in phase 1, and we're going to use Time Warp for phase 2 Maleficent here just to keep the damage relatively even between them. We didn't want to overkill them and potentially mess up the whole fight. The main mechanics here are just to be defusing bombs, which I'm a little bit greedy because of my combustion. I'm not going to be defusing those bombs. I do get hit with the Shadow Fury though, which does disrupt my combustion and stuns me for a few seconds, and that's a little annoying, but luckily the rest of our group is handling the bombs, so I don't need to worry too much about that, and I can just kind of greed for damage here. As she goes to do this like explosive squirrel bombs ability, you do need to stun her with this Shadow Fury, although it's helpful to use a couple defenses. That's why I pop mirror images here, because I know that there is still a good bit of damage going out. We actually missed one of the bombs there. That one wasn't on me, even though I was not doing bombs really. It wasn't on me because I had the Shadow Fury. I couldn't really move too far and disarm that because I was stunned at the moment. So you know, maybe luckily we can still recover from it. We had a battle res on our druid, and I did not have to use ice block. I had the cauterize, although I was prepared to use the ice block if necessary. After that, we switch back into the Millhouse phase. We just interrupt the crystals that are channeling onto him, and we can burn him down, and then Maleficent comes back and she dies a few seconds later. I actually used my combustion there at the tail end. Probably not that useful because we just had a few seconds left on it. Luckily, though, we've got a long run to the next pack, so my combustion will be pretty close to back up by time we get there. Going into the Raging Spirit here, this one is a little bit sketchy because I don't have combustion up, and I don't think most of our DPS have too much of their damage cooldowns available, and we don't have an urn here to stun him, so he's going to get his big rage cast. That's a big AoE damage to everybody in the group. So I pop my Alter Time just to be able to heal myself and help out the healers. Luckily, it's not unfortified, so it doesn't really wipe us, but it does drop everyone pretty low, and Alter Time helps me out, and everyone else kind of drops to about half health or a little bit lower. And my combustion comes up right on the tail end of it, but obviously not going to pop it here while he's in execute range. We're going to save it for this next pull, which is going to be a double pull. We're going to pull everybody on this platform, and I'm going to use the urn to stun them up. So you kind of take this angle here. You go to the left and then kind of cut in between the two while the tank pulls it. I get on the urn, make sure everyone's just about in range, and pop it, and then pop right into my combustion rotation using Flame Strike instead of Pyroblast because there's so many enemies stacked up here, and that's going to make pretty short work of them as we just deal tons of AoE damage with an AoE combustion, especially when everyone gets to stay nice and stacked inside that flame patch. I'm not really looking at trying to deal with those explosive orbs during that combustion rotation, just because I think it would mess me up if I sent, like, say, sent a Phoenix Flames at an orb that disappeared. Then I wouldn't get to crit credit if it doesn't like actually make contact with the enemy there. So I was just relying on our other players to take care of the explosive orb during that time. Going into this passage into the Arden Wield wing, this is my least favorite part of the dungeon by far. It's so annoying to like have to be looking your camera kind of looking to left and right trying to see when those little white orbs spawn, and even though I started walking into the section whenever there wasn't one, I still get hit by one. I just say screw it, I'm gonna just double blink plus Night Fae shift to get forward and just kind of like triple blink through that area just because I don't want to be taking any damage. So just get to the end and don't worry about it, because if you get hit by like two of those, it could potentially be a death there for no reason at all. I hate that section. I really like this next section, though. There's just a lot of ads that you don't generally need to kite too terribly far, so they get to stay nice and stacked up in my flame patch, and just combustion gets to do a ton of value when there's basically uncapped AoE from the flame strike. So I like this section a lot as a fire mage. Unfortunately, on this first pull, I do mess it up quite a bit here. I was trying to get a lot of value out of my Rune of Power. Since I had that down, I was using my fire blasts in order to get instant cast flame strikes, and that got me a lot of damage. But then I make the very, very bad decision to combust here at the end of the pull, when most of these mobs are almost dead. I mean, I do get the full 12 seconds of combustion before they die, but I didn't get a whole lot of damage of value added out of the combustion because I didn't have any flame blast charges or fire blast charges going into the combustion. So that was just bad. And then I don't have combustion up for this next pack here, which I play just horribly. I think this was a kind of reminiscent of what happened at the Mana Storms wing with the dog, where I just said I just played horribly. I was trying to deal with explosive orbs, and I was trying to use fire blasts and scorches, and I messed up my timings. Like, you can see the cast timeline in the bottom right of my screen. There's just like big gaps in between, like trying to cast scorch, but then it gets interrupted because someone else takes the explosive orb, and my flame or fire blasts don't do much. And this was just a bad pull. I mean, you can see my DPS. It's garbage. It's lower than the healers by a substantial margin. And the worst part is, since I wasn't even doing like single target damage, I wasn't like casting fireballs and pyroblasts, is that I didn't get too much cooldown reduction on my combustion. So going into this prideful, I try to use my shifting power and get hit by the prideful boast that shoots out, because I was trying to channel that to get cooldown reduction, and it was just a bit of a mess. So even though my combustion does come up about halfway through this prideful, I know that we're going to do a big pull right afterwards, because that's generally what you want to do with the prideful, and our tank even says so right here. I'm going to hold on to my combustion, and so this is going to take a little bit longer, but that's okay. We've got our anti-magic zone, and it's not too terribly difficult to heal right through that. So we're waiting for the tank to make the big pull here, and I'm not entirely sure what he wants to pull. I accidentally almost pull that little bird off on the right. Luckily, don't quite clip into its aggro range. And since I'm the one who's going to pop the urn here, I'm standing right by the urn waiting for him to kind of pull everything that I think he's going to pull. I'm not sure exactly what he's getting. Looks like he's got everything in there, so we pop the urn and stun everybody up. And I get to combust and do an AoE combustion with Flame Strike, and that gets a ton of damage, even though I'm starting a whole lot later, so my overall damage on this pack is going to be a touch lower, since I basically had to wait 5 or 6 seconds to start DPSing, whereas the other people in our group got to start DPSing right off the bat. Dropping down into the next section here, this section can be a little scary for your tanks in particular, because these big birds will add a stacking debuff to the tank that increases the damage taken from their ability. And so he's trying to kite them away, at least initially, but I didn't quite get the memo, and I burst them really quick, and I have to use my invisibility to make sure I can drop aggro, to make sure I don't take too many stacks of that, because I would drop very quickly from those big birds if they were constantly attacking me here. Luckily, after that initial move, the tank will keep them relatively stable inside my flame patches from Flame Strike, and we can get lots of good damage done. And once again, because this isn't fortified, you don't need to worry too terribly much about this, but this is definitely a scary pull for your tanks on fortified weeks, and so be very careful about this particular pull. You can also see I'm decursing here. Some of these ads add a curse to some of your players, and if you stand still for too long, then it potentially, I think it just like stuns you or puts you to sleep if you don't jump to remove some of the stacks. And it is a curse, so mages and shamans can remove it pretty easily with their decurse ability, so you want to be getting that off as frequently as possible, mainly prioritizing decursing casters, healers, and other people who can't jump quite as commonly. Luckily, our tanks and our melee can freely DPS while jumping, so that's not too big of a deal, but still, I'm the only one in this group that can decurse. I'm the one who's getting that out as quickly as possible, and I make sure to prioritize getting the healer to avoid a situation where they accidentally get stunned and might cause a wipe. As we pull these, And now we're going into the last pack of the dungeon, and both me and our paladin are probably a little bit upset here that the tank pulled the pack, and then we both dropped. I dropped my flame strike, they dropped their consecration, and then the tank immediately moved them down to pull another pack, but that's okay, as we get them down here, and we can just AoE them down with no problem. Now there are these little like white swirlies that appear on the ground throughout this whole section, and I don't put too much effort into dodging them. They really don't do a whole lot of damage, and especially for a caster that is going to lose a lot of damage if I have to interrupt like a flame strike cast or something, I really don't think it's that big of a deal. Like if you get hit by them, it's very small amounts of damage. And when I do have like Scorch, I can easily dodge that and easily cast while moving, but in most cases I'm not worried too terribly much about those little swirlies, at least at this key level. It might scale up on higher levels, but at the moment I'm not too worried about it. Now we get our final Prideful right before the second to last boss, and once again I use Combustion right on the pull. None of our other DPS are going to use their DPS cooldowns, and we're just going to have Combustion really carry this, and so that we can burn the boss just like ideally that happens in most of the Pridefuls. You want to be having Combustion up for it so that your other DPS can save their damage, and you shine on the Prideful, and they can shine on the boss right afterwards. So we get it, we immediately jump down as quickly as possible, pull the boss, and we're going to use Time Warp right at the start, and everyone else is going to use their DPS cooldowns while I focus on getting the cooldown reduction on my Combustion. This boss is not too terribly complex from a mechanical standpoint, just kind of dodge out of these portals and get into the portals when you need to, but there is a dot that jumps around between players that deals quite a bit of ticking damage and also applies a debuff that causes you to take even more increased damage from the dot. So if it goes to the same person multiple times, that can be very deadly. And especially on Tyrannical, where the fights last a lot longer and the damage just increase, it can be pretty sketchy near the end. The healing requirement and damage coming out can be quite high. As I get into my Combustion here, I'm going to greed and not get in to jump into the portals. I just Ice Block and cancel it right away because I don't want to lose any of my Combustion uptime. I just lose a little bit for Ice Block plus cancel it rather than getting thrown up into the air. And that also just helps out the healers. I don't have to take fall damage or anything like that. And so that's a good use of my class utility. As we get into the next cycle here, as she's about to cast that explosive contrivance again, this is where things get a little bit sketchy. As she's getting low, everyone has some stacks of that debuff, and as I get thrown up into the air, I actually have that Arc Lightning jump to me and chunks me really low, plus the fall damage, which I probably should have just like slow falled, but instead I drop low, so I use my health potion. As it jumps again, though, it jumps to our Death Knight, and it actually kills him right at the end here. He had some stacks of that and was already at half health, so a little bit unfortunate there, but luckily the boss goes down a few seconds later, so we use a quick battle res to get him up, and it's no big deal. As we move on to the last boss, Amoezala. So going into the last boss, Amoezala here, there are two things that I want to talk about. One is that for most DPS classes, you want to save your cooldowns to deal with the images of Amoezala on the side when there's kind of that intermission period. But for Fire Mages, you don't really need to worry about that because Combustion has a 1 minute cooldown, and there's almost exactly 1 minute between the pull and when he sends you off to the sides there. And the second thing I wanted to mention is that do not use immunities on this boss. Now, I'm not sure if they've fixed it. I don't think they have. I haven't heard anything about it, but there was a bug for a while where if you used an immunity, like say Ice Block, or I'm not sure if Paladin Bubble would do it, but I know Ice Block definitely did it. If you Ice Blocked on this platform, like say, you're going to get hit by that Masters of Death and you just want to Ice Block in place, that would cause the boss to think that you were off the platform and start spawning these orbs that deal just massive AoE damage and would like basically cause a wipe because the game thinks you're in the wrong spot and it just wants to wipe your group. So that was a problem. I would accidentally wipe some groups doing that. I've since learned that that is caused by immunities. Once again, I know that Ice Block does it. I'm not sure about every other immunity or like combat drop ability. Anyway, as we get off to these side portals, make sure you have one DPS assigned to each. I got assigned back left, no problem. Jump over here, and my Combustion comes up just in time to deal with these ads. Now, I have my trinkets macroed into my Combustion. I've got my Soul Igniter and my PvP trinket, which adds a whole bunch of intellect whenever I activate it, and I'm not really sure that that was necessary here. I actually kill this pretty darn quickly with Combustion, that I don't really need that extra oomph from the trinkets, I don't think. I could have saved that for whenever we get back to the burn phase on Wazala. In fact, I have so much time that I'm just kind of walking around here in my Night Fae shapeshift form, I'm just going to go say hi to the to the other platforms. You can just run around wherever. And if you can actually get back to where the image of Wazala is, then he's not going to pull you. You're just going to be there right away, and you can get a couple extra seconds on DPS, but it's kind of RNG where he lands. So once we get back here, I'm just going to start pumping a bunch of damage into him. It's a little bit awkward because he ticks down at kind of a weird variable-ish rate, so I'm not entirely sure when he's going to drop into execute range for Scorch. So you can see I use Scorch probably a little bit earlier than I should have, because some of those weren't crits, because he wasn't quite in execute range because he was still being drained down. So a little bit of inefficiency there, but overall nothing too bad. Like I said, we do need a lot of damage on this boss, because even after all that, he still needs about 5% left damage to finish him off. So you want to make sure you definitely do that before the next phase transition. You got about a minute to do that. And I do make a little bit of a mistake here in the placement of this Cosmic Artifice. I actually kind of... the range are supposed to put it near the back wall, but I kind of do it right in front of our Boomkin instead of running off to the side. And you can see we make a little bit of a line here. It makes it a little bit awkward for everyone to get through. Not so much for me, because I can just blink right through it, but it could have been a little bit of a problem if we were a little bit tighter for space here on this Masters of Death. But we're not, and we get him down pretty effectively, as I just can easily execute him with the Scorch Searing Touch talent. So that does it for this dungeon. I want to thank you all for watching. It's been wonderful going through the commentary and watching the replay, seeing where little areas I made mistakes, especially with explosives, some of those pulls where I just did not do well at all. And so that's definitely something that I can work on for next time. So thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you next time.